And that's our wedding. I'm Ross Benjamin. Hi.
Hi. Wait, okay, let's begin.
Hi, I'm Ross Benjamin, the curator of this year's Festival Neue Literatur. As a translator of German language literature, I'm delighted to be a part of this festival, which introduces to English-speaking audiences here in New York City 6 German language authors, 2 from Germany, 2 from Austria, and 2 from Switzerland, alongside 2 US authors, in a series of events and panel discussions that open up an excitingly intercultural literary conversation. The title of this year's festival is Seriously Funny. The festival theme is humor, which might at first glance seem to be simply a counterpoint to a certain stereotype of German culture and literature as particularly humorless, grim, heavy, ponderous. But actually it's intended to go further than that and to explore the interdependence of humor and seriousness, how literary humor helps us navigate existential predicaments and even pain and trauma. Well, German language literature, I think, is important in the US insofar as any literature is important in the US, or having a wide array of literatures is important in any culture. And I think German language literature should clearly be a part of that because it's rich and has a lot to offer. And I even think within each literature, the widest possible diversity usually correlates with the richest possible literary experience. Shoot. A classically German formulation of humor is a quote from Nietzsche, who said, I think he said the reason that humans alone have invented laughter is because we can suffer so deeply. Because humans suffer so deeply, we invented laughter. Tag, als meine Frau einen Mann fand, the day my wife found a husband. The Swiss writer Sibylle Berg chronicles the destruction of the illusions at the core of a seemingly stable conventional marriage. The novel is told in alternating interior monologues by the husband and the wife becomes addicted to sex with a stranger. Berg goes straight for the jugular in showing how this couple's fragile bourgeois existence falls apart in the face of the almost demonic power of sex. American author Jenny Ophil's Department of Speculation is likewise about infidelity in a marriage in crisis, but it's written from a single point of view, that of the wife, as the narrator ironically calls herself. It also deals powerfully with motherhood, artistic aspiration, aging, and the many tensions and contradictions within these experiences. This story is told as a series of vignettes interspersed with literary and philosophical references and reflections. Its raw honesty goes hand in hand with mordant wit. Meistens alles sehr schnell by Christopher Klurbel, a young German writer, has also been published in an English translation by Aaron Kerner as Almost Everything Very Fast. The central relationship in the book is between a young man named Albert, who has grown up in an orphanage, and his intellectually disabled father, Fred, who didn't have the capacity to raise a child, but whom Albert has spent time with throughout his life. One of the strongest and most remarkable aspects of the book lies in the portrayal of Fred, whose childlike way of seeing the world and relating to Albert is often funny, but never at Fred's expense, always in a way that gives him the maximum of dignity and respect for who he is. Our other German writer, Iris Haneke, has written a novel called Wie der Müll geordnet wird, or How the Trash Gets Sorted, a formally experimental exploration into the breakdown of meaning. The first part of the novel is written in the form of notes by a narrator, who has evidently had a troubled past, is perhaps a somewhat unsound mind and is making a conscious effort to do things that make no sense. In Blasmusikpop, which can be roughly translated as brass band pop music, Vea Kaiser, a young Austrian author, tells a story of living in provinciality, isolated in the mountains of Austria and longing for the wider world. It's a fresh take on a traditionally Austrian theme, because instead of treating parochialism and isolation with a certain venom and resentment the way it's traditionally been treated in a lot of Austrian literature, Kaiser portrays her characters with a great deal of fondness, amusement, and empathy for their all-too-human foibles. Der Goalie bin ich, or I Am the Goalie, by Swiss writer Pedro Lenz, is about an ex-drug addict who has just been released from jail for his involvement with selling illegal drugs and his effort to start a new life and find his place in the world. Lenz not only writes in a Swiss dialect, traditionally an exclusively spoken and not written form of communication, but he also recreates a way of talking belonging to a specific social milieu. Our other American author is James Hanahan. His novel Delicious Foods is a harrowing story of drug addiction, racism, and human trafficking. It's probably the most traumatic and devastating of the works featured in the festival, and yet it's also among the funniest. A number of chapters are narrated from the point of view of crack cocaine itself, which goes by the name of Scotty in the book. The persona of crack as Scotty is so brilliant in part because it's so terrifying. Scotty takes no responsibility for ruining people's lives, feels like he's always being unfairly blamed when all he wants to do is hang out and have a good time, mind dance with his friends as he calls it, help them escape all the demands and suffering of life. Austrian author Xaver Bayer taps into a similar vein of humor in his short story Mal, or Meal, which is an at once horrific and absurd story involving snipers killing civilians. In his book Geheimnisvolles Knistern aus dem Zauberreich, roughly mysterious crackling from the magic realm, a collection of partly essayistic, partly quotidian, partly surreal miniatures, the pieces range from an extremely matter-of-fact description of being burned alive to idle musings of contemporary city dwellers. Obviously, the sorts of humor that our 8 authors are using are as various as the works themselves. One of the things that the history of humor in German language literature reminds us is that humor can be so many things besides a sort of entertaining interlude in the midst of more serious concerns. Part of the importance of Festival Neue Literatur is that lovers of literature owe it to themselves to expose themselves to the wide array of things happening in different countries' literatures. It seems obvious, but we can forget that there are always different things happening in different literatures at different times, and different literatures also reflect and rework different histories. By highlighting humor in this festival featuring German language literature, we can see how different forms of humor might be more in the forefront of cultures other than our own, and we can recognize currents of humor in our culture that might be more apparent in light of those other traditions. For example, if the form of humor that goes straight to the central quandaries of the human condition is particularly present and potent in German language literature, I would argue that the kinds of humor we can detect in the work of our US authors Jenny Ophil and James Hanahan comes into sharper focus when we place it in that context. So that's something unique that the festival offers by putting these authors from diverse traditions with diverse approaches in dialogue under a common umbrella. That's that.